real joy to have you here to be part of our annual conference. I also want to thank the wonderful folks at the Ash Center who have provided for so many years just a wonderful community of collegiality, as well as really critical fundamental support for everything we do at the IARA project. So thank you very much, and for that work even to this very moment. Also want to thank my team, Miriam, Erica, Allison, Angel, Caroline, and Gloria, for all you do to advance IARA's research agenda, as well as to support our work here at our annual conference. Thank you for joining us today, our 6th annual conference. Many of you have been with us on this journey from the very beginning, and my guess is that none of you, like me, could have anticipated the reversals and the full-scale retreat from equity work that is happening at this moment. My team and I, in preparation for today, were sharing news stories literally that were filling our inboxes for a range of reporting on what's happening in this country, various attacks, and in some cases, defenses of equity. 4 years ago, I said these words before starting our conference in the fall of 2020. I said, the bar for public reckoning has been set low in the United States. Public efforts at recognizing and committing to dismantling systems of oppression and institutional racism remain often trivial at best. In many corporate statements, familiar themes have emerged, calling out racism, standing with the Black community, and speaking up as allies. And yet companies needed, as I said then, to be honest in their solidarity statements about their own past failures. And the perpetual goal of achieving diversity cannot be a substitute for redistributing organizational power and pursuing racial justice in society. I said every company should track its overall percentage of Black employees, including those in senior leadership and on boards, as well as the actual expenses funneled toward ending systemic racism. Leaders must reckon with, for instance, why their company may overcharge Black customers for goods, services, and access to credit, or why their enhanced security surveillance of Black shoppers is no different than racial profiling by the police. They must also recognize that all of us, individuals and organizations alike, are interdependent. The racial oppression in society mirrors and catalyzes racial oppression in the workplace. What's painfully clear about diversity and solidarity statements is that they are a lot easier to write than to follow. After all, most everyone has both. Pursuing anti-racist change, I finished by saying, isn't easy or comfortable. Organizations must account for their own exclusionary histories and their ongoing policies and practices in perpetuating systemic racism. They must be held accountable to the publics they serve. I believe every word of what I uttered 4 years ago in the fall of 2020. My research and that of thousands of scholars back up these words. But at this moment, likely millions of Americans believe I work at an institution and in an industry racked with so-called DEI corruption, harboring people like me. Indeed, in our electoral political arena, while it is not new, it is certainly elevated and escalated to an existential threat to the very nature of how truth and knowledge function in a healthy democracy. The current vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, has promised to essentially destroy certainly the autonomy in higher education, but perhaps the industry in and of itself as we know it. He said publicly in 2021, the professors are the enemy, as he then quoted Richard Nixon going back to the 1970s. Needless to say, so much has changed. Whereas higher education should be part of the knowledge base necessary and essential to sustain and to create a functioning democracy, it would seem at this time that millions are being convinced that higher education is the ruin of this nation. One of the changes that I personally am making at this moment of an existential threat is that the IARA project is moving to Princeton University in 2025. And with this news, let me share a little bit of my journey here at Harvard to set some more of the context for today's conference. When I began teaching at the Harvard Kennedy School a year after my arrival to campus where I first landed as a Radcliffe Fellow, Donald Trump was elected that fall. This school, like so many others, was caught flat-footed, uncertain of how to make sense of Trump's rise. Many students, not all, demanded greater attention to how white supremacist movements had fueled Trump's rise. The Charlottesville anti-Black and anti-Semitic rally had taken place just the summer before. From that fall through this one, there are three powerful lessons I want to convey. First, I have never taught better, more engaged, and more thoughtful graduate students who had no interest whatsoever in becoming historians and following in my career footsteps. As future policymakers and diplomats and even elected officials, these students, however, have helped me become a better teacher and scholar and a more hopeful citizen about what brilliant people can do. I feel a keen sense that my former students here at Harvard, who now number over 1,000, will make this world a better place. I believe they will fight in defense of equity in the world and truth and justice. I believe it because I've already seen what they are capable of doing. Second lesson, being here at Harvard and at the Kennedy School in particular, I learned how necessary it is to make change in the world right where you are. Not at somebody else's school or company, not in another workplace or nonprofit. The greatest opportunity for change is often right in front of us, within arm's reach, on our Zooms and in our conference rooms. Between individuals and societies are institutions that are the bedrock of civil society and bind the me and the we together. It is that work within our institutions across every sector, private, public, and nonprofit, that we are not at this point and should be leaning more into the changes necessary. And it is why, after several years being here at Harvard, I founded the IARA Project. Here at the IARA Project, we believe that what politicians won't do and individuals can't do, our institutions must do. Institutions are indeed the circuits that connect our systems together. Harvard Kennedy School's values and commitments to public service are truly admirable and a source of inspiration. But over the many years I've been here, too often I watched and I listened and I witnessed this institution not practice what it preaches. I saw talented staff and students marginalized. I faced resistance by administrators for advocating for greater diversity and equity at the school, quite ironic given the attacks this school faces today. I heard people speak lies to faculty and students. None of these are unique features to Harvard or to the Kennedy School. But if we don't fix our own shops, how can we fix other people's, especially in a policy school built to promote good governance? The third lesson I learned is that organizing and change is possible. Indeed, it is fundamental and essential. I watched this place grow and become a better place for all students in spite of the many setbacks and false starts. I am proud of how hard students pushed and how many staff and some of my colleagues rallied to build a community of equity that could meet the needs of all our students in ways that had simply not been true during my early years and perhaps for the past 380 years prior. I don't try to know what is in people's hearts, but I can say sincerely, at this school, policies and practices change for the better. A core class that I teach was co-designed with my colleague, Professor Sandra Susan Smith, and now a number of additional faculty teach this same core class, came on the books to explain how structural racism works in America and how colonialism shaped and continues to impact the maldistribution of resources, power, and security in the world as just one powerful example of positive change. Persistence and hard work paid off here. Goodwill was not enough, but good work was. Now this work at the Harvard Kennedy School and across this university is under attack. And it reminds me of traditions that I've taught and learned from the Black freedom struggles of the 19th and 20th century. That is, that leaders must act in the face of attacks. Leaders don't turn and run or hide when the enemy advances. All of us in this room have celebrated the sacrifices of those who came before us. We have shared these same stories of Black heroism and sacrifice with young people, sometimes with our own children, with our mentees. But what is the value of history, of this history, if when our time comes for leadership, we are silent? The lessons of the past are not biblical parables or moral narratives bound to faith traditions. The archives speak the truth of the real lives of people who used their agency and took risks, and sometimes failed or suffered losses. The stakes are real. What happened to former President Claudine Gay is real. What happened to Harvard's Chief Diversity Officer, Sherry Charleston, is real. What happened to Shirley R. Green, a Title IX coordinator at the Harvard Extension School, is real. And what happened to Christina Cross, an assistant professor of sociology, is real. What happened to me is real. Congresswoman Virginia Foxx called out my class during the December 5th congressional testimony. She said a radical ideology had taken over the universities, and she singled out a class that I actually teach with others on the history of race and racism as a prime example of an anti-Semitic and hateful ideology at work at Harvard. One of her staffers, who knows nothing about me or my class, told a Boston Globe reporter that I was a race agitator. It is also real and true that there has been no sustained or prominent resistance to the attacks on these Black women or Black administrators, staff, and faculty at this university. The latest attacks mounted by Bill Ackman and others is to attack Black studies as a place of overinvestment at Harvard University that is a sign of corruption. But these are lies and distortions and are designed to induce inaction, apathy, fear. And all this misinformation is one battlefront in a larger political war to destroy, yet again in this country, the possibility of a fully functioning and just multiracial democracy. Christopher Rufo, one of the masterminds behind this movement, told Politico sometime last year, my primary objective is to eliminate DEI bureaucracy in every institution in America and restore truth rather than racialist ideology as the guiding principle of America. In the same interview, Rufo bragged about coordinating a conservative playbook against Harvard that has already been used around the country. I've run this same playbook, he said, on critical race theory, on gender ideology, on DEI bureaucracy. He continued, for the time being, given the structure of our institutions, this is a universal strategy that can be applied by the right to most issues. I think we've demonstrated that it can be successful. Rufo is right to point to his prior successes. He is on a winning streak. He invented the anti-CRT movement in the summer of 2020. 24 states now restrict teaching about race and racism, gender and sexism. He made the whole thing up, as he has proudly boasted. The truth is that racially and economically diverse students, as you will hear from some today, bring assets, skills, and talents to college campuses in part because the barriers they have overcome are higher, the walls they have climbed taller, and the bridges they have crossed span wider than what traditional students have faced before arriving at many colleges and universities, especially elite ones. These assets compound to the benefit of everyone, especially the privileged, who are more likely to work well with others in an increasingly diverse global marketplace that no matter what illiberal politicians and wannabe fascists say, is inevitable. The world is changing quickly, and we will be better for DEI as we set about to save the planet from the extractive and exploitative excesses of an elite few. But you don't have to take my word for the benefits of diversity on our campuses. Princeton's president, Chris Eisgruber, in his 2024 State of the University address, attacked head-on the lie that diversity is eroding standards and destroying excellence in higher education. He said, and I quote, indeed, only dewy-eyed nostalgia, baleful ignorance, or an ideologically driven determination to erase history could justify a claim that leading American universities were more focused on excellence in the past than they are today. Exactly the opposite is true. America's leading research universities have dismantled one barrier after another to become the genuine centers of excellence that they are today. And indeed, that is the heart of the backlash today. We are more capable and more committed to making this country and this world a better place for everyone. So we cannot accept the lies that make us fearful about our role in higher education and in the workplace to solve for systemic racism. The premature death of Black women during and after childbirth, the smog of toxic air, the heat of treeless neighborhoods, the poison in the lead-laced pipes running into our homes, the inequities of pay and opportunity at every step of the job market, the intense segregation that haunts the hallways of our children's schools, and the lethal realities of exercising one's constitutional rights and civil liberties when encountering law enforcement. Today, you will hear from some of the smartest and most committed leaders across journalism, higher education, venture capital, and philanthropy to help us learn how to, in fact, stand our ground to these attacks on equity and justice. We have 3 sessions today, beginning in just a moment with a panel, then a keynote by Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell, and closing with a fireside chat with Jason Stanley, author most recently of Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. And let me just get us going by quoting Jason. He writes, if we are to stop the United States' drift toward fascism, we must recognize the nature of the challenges facing our educational institutions. Schools and universities are indeed on the front lines of the multi-decade far-right effort to reinforce anti-democratic myths and ultimately to transform a flawed but hopeful liberal democracy into an authoritarian, potentially fascist nation state. As I said, we'll be closing out today's conference with a conversation with Jason Stanley.